This episode of The Energy Show is sponsored by Solarcraft, providing solar, batteries, and heat pumps to Marin, Sonoma, and Napa counties for over 40 years. Solarcraft's 100% employee owners help our community step out of their carbon footprint and into saving money. Visit solarcraft.com.
So, you want to save the world with clean energy? Make money doing it? Confused about the economic and technical realities of residential and commercial solar, batteries, heat pumps, EVs? Want the real-world scoop on new energy technologies, not manufacturer hype? Then tune in to the Weekly Energy Show, hosted by Barry Cinnamon. Insights from Barry's 40-plus years in the solar and energy industry will help you understand the future ways we'll generate and consume energy. And now, here's Barry.
Welcome to this week's Energy Show. Now, there's lots of people commenting about changes in the clean energy industry in the United States. For the big picture and drilling down into details, I'd like to turn to the most knowledgeable, most prolific, and most articulate podcaster in the industry. That person is Nico Johnson. He's the founder and host of Suncast. And right off their website, quote, "The mission of Suncast is to help you connect and grow your company and career in the clean energy revolution and to shine the spotlight on people, companies, and markets you ought to be paying attention to." So here's a bit more about his background that you may not know. He originally was a Peace Corps volunteer, and then he somehow got into solar. We'll get on to why. But he started sales and marketing going way back to 2006. With Blue Line, Lumeta, Trina, and Conergy. Then he went out on his own to start Suncast Media in 2015. And he's been killing it ever since. I think he's up to like over 800 audio and video podcasts published. So welcome to the show, Nico.
Just so that we are accurate, because I know the value accuracy, we just published episode 824.
Wow.
824. And I know I've shared this with you privately, but when I started out, I was a big fan. I'm a podcast junkie. I was a big fan of the work that you were doing already on the radio. And frankly, there wasn't anyone else doing a show. The Energy Show, you called it back in the day, it was the only real podcast that focused on the solar energy industry. But you were focused very tactically on what homeowners needed to know. And what I couldn't find was any discussion about what business owners needed to know to effectively compete in this space, or career professional needed to know if they wanted to do the thing that we needed most, which was transition away from fossil fuels, away from tech, away from healthcare, away from biotech, away from hospitality into this industry. If we wanted to scale from what was then about 60, 70,000 employees in the U.S. to 500,000 employees, how are we going to do it? We have to embrace the fact that the transition is happening, and we have to acquire the storytelling gene. We have to actually create a narrative that compels people to go work for these companies like Cinnamon Energy. So over the years, that's been our mission, is to really inspire people by, as you said, shining a light on the folks who are doing it. They have something remarkable to talk about. It's one of the reasons that I'm here today, is because, Barry, you are one of those pioneering founders who has laid the groundwork that many other, you're one of the giants on whose shoulders we stand, as we often say. And
I'm just an old guy in solar. I like what I'm doing, and I like helping companies. I like helping people. I'm altruistic. I'm not just trying to maximize things for us. But, what we did at the Energy Show with Cinnamon Energy Systems, and it even goes back to when I was at Akina.
Yeah.
The podcast was really a marketing tool, but it's evolved a lot more beyond that as I got started, really just to help everybody in the industry. Now, you have even a broader scope because you're dealing with utility scale, commercial. I do a little bit on that, but you kind of cover the whole thing. And I was always curious, how did you get started with the Suncast podcasts?
It's a story that traces back to, I don't know if you recall Adam James when he was still at Green Tech Media. Remember Adam? He went on and he worked at Solar City, and now he's at Energy Impact Partners. He was the analyst for Latin America at Green Tech Media. And I had been following podcasts because I became a marathon runner. While I was living here in Oakland, I became a marathon runner around 2011. Still working at Trina. And I started listening to the management guys. And these guys just captivated my attention. There's a whole bunch of podcasts back then that were about teaching folks how to do specific things. how to be who you want to be. And then there was a guy, John Lee Dumas, who started a podcast called Entrepreneur on Fire that really caught my attention because it was really the first daily business podcast. And this guy was just tireless. And I aspired to do something that impactful where I could reach millions of people because I wasn't really getting that opportunity at my day job. I'd gotten into a few hobbies. Kite surfing, notably, was the fastest growing sport in the world at the time. And I thought I'll start a kite surfing podcast. And I had moved on to work for Conergy. But really, it was the sort of rebirthed Conergy that had gotten bought by Kawa Capital down in Florida. They were a customer of mine at Trina. They had recruited me to come help them build their Latin America utility business. And I found myself many late nights in the office, but also in the field in conversation with Adam at Green Tech Media and a couple of other analysts at WoodMac and other companies because they would figure out eventually who were the folks on the ground that actually understood what was going on. I happened to be one of those folks because through Trina and Conergy, I had really figured out how the utility scale market and the C&I market were working at the time and who were the real players. And I remember one day I had this quickening. I'll never forget where I was standing in the conference room in the Kawa offices in Miami. And I said to Adam, the whole conversation we've just had for the last half hour should have been recorded. He was like, God, no. Green Tech would fire me. And I said, well, they can't fire me. What if we tried to record these conversations? Because the fact is, like, what I had learned at Conergy more than anywhere else was actually what was inside the black box. My whole career, I'd been out on the other side of the veil. There were all these people in the know, and then the rest of us who just sort of did what they told us to do because we weren't in the know. We didn't know how finance worked. We didn't know how the machine worked, right? So at Trina, I saw how the machine worked at a macro level, but I didn't know how finance worked. And at Conergy, I figured out how finance worked. And I was like, Jesus, it's not fair that in many ways, because I am middle-income, white, male American, I get access to this machine and others don't. And it turns out that media in many forms, but podcasts specifically at that time, think about 2011, 2012, 2013, like end of 2015, it was a medium that was so underrepresented and so intimate that I knew with the rapport I had begun to build, like the skill of rapport building, I could get people to talk about things that they wouldn't otherwise talk about. And if you listen all the way back to the very first episode, with the exception of the first episode I actually launched, it was the Latin America Solar Report. I literally was just hijacking Adam's report that he would put out from Green Tech Media and basically broadcast it. And I was like, this is a genius idea. And then Adam told me after he recorded that episode that he was leaving GTM to go to Solar City and that he couldn't do any more episodes with me. So I interviewed Marco Garcia at Next Tracker, interviewed a handful of other like folks that I knew in Latin American market, stayed in the Latin American market, but I realized pretty early on there was a great storytelling medium where I could pull back the veil. And so from episode 2 onward, as I started to sort of get this rhythm of what am I doing here, I said, we pull back the veil so that you can see what really happens inside the industry. You can decide where you're going to put your effort and build your legacy. That's language I've developed over a decade to be able to better explain it. But even back then, I realized that what I had the privilege to do, Barry, was to actually, I had been given the freedom to operate in between the two rooms. And I could literally pull back the veil and say, this is what actually happens inside. And these people were giving me so much trust that many of those first 30, 40, 50 episodes, the guests would come back and say, I've never had an experience like that. Can I please get a copy of it so I can share it with my children? Because we went so deep about my history, my background, et cetera, that this tells my story in a more complete way. Thank you for doing that. So, Barry, one of my big regrets is that I didn't get you into that canon of pioneers early enough. And here we are at episode 825. 8 something by the time it publishes this one on Suncast. But I'm glad that we've developed a relationship over the years where, despite having been a competitor of mine really early in my career, long before I started a podcast, I've grown to admire you and respect the work that you do.
Well, you've kind of taken it many steps beyond, just this ordinary audio podcast.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you have an operation doing this stuff. You're doing, we've got 2-camera video shoot over here. Yeah. You've got production team, the whole thing. So tell us a little bit about the operation, pulling the veil back. What's going on at Suncast Media?
Sure. So I realized in 2018 that I didn't know what I was doing. And I was taking consulting agreements to pay the bills. And InPhase was our first formal sponsor. CPS was another sponsor shortly after that. And companies were saying, hey, you've got a great audience. We're getting thousands of downloads an episode. People are recognizing that it's not just listeners, it's decision makers in the industry who have influence, who have pull. I'm getting people like Jigger at Shaw and Dan Sugar and, Sheldon Kimber, like vocal leaders who've actually like built and sold companies, and they could see that I had access. And several folks came to me and they counseled me and said, you really got to figure out how to productize this, or you're just going to stay a consultant with a side hustle of a podcast. And I said, time I really wish GPT had been around. I said, Google, how to productize business. Like, what does that mean? And I've had a number of mentors come along through the years. Neil Dykman was so generous to teach me.
Yeah, Neil's a fountain of
He's
information.
a dynamo.
Just slow him down.
Yeah, it's hard to slow him down.
Yeah.
So Neil, for those who don't know, he started cleantech.org. And I'm going to do an episode with Neil to explain all of that. But cleantech.org was the original clean tech blog. And this guy figured out how to leverage other people's brain power to power a storytelling machine. And so Neil Dykman was very generous, and he explained the media model. Do you want me to explain to you what he told me?
Yeah, definitely.
So at the time I was doing interviews, and I was trying to figure out how the event space worked. And I didn't really have a data model or anything like that, but I knew that there was like a community element to it. And I kind of had the sense that there was a three-legged stool kind of model. He pulled back the veil for me. He said, Nico, here's how media works. And you can test this against any media company anywhere in the world right now. He said, this is ages old, and it works everywhere. He said, there's three legs to the stool. There's free media, okay? Something that you can consume that they pay money to create and give away for free, all right? Free media. Think about GTM. Mm-hmm. Their front doorstep was all these journalists they paid for who gave the industry's best journalism, right? Same with Axios. Now, a lot of them have like a paywall, or they'll give you 1 or 2 articles or whatever, right? But free media, free content is a cornerstone of media, right? I'll never forget, to that end, I went to CERAWeek, which is like the Davos of energy, not clean. It's literally like the heartbeat of oil and gas. And CNN was there, the CBS was there, and they were not being paid a penny by CERAWeek because they have a machine that recognized how to monetize free content, right? Reuters called me and said, hey, we see what you're doing with RE+. Can you come do like a couple of interviews at our Reuters Hydrogen Conference? And I was like, yeah, sure. Here's the model. We do this and we do a revenue share and it works. And they were like, you want us to pay you? No, thanks. CBS is also going to be there and they don't ask us for money. I was like, oh God, this isn't working. So fast forward, I had this conversation with Neil, and Neil's like, you got it wrong. Content is free. And then there's a directory. So let's call directory. I break directory down into 3 different buckets, but what directory is access to proprietary knowledge. Mm-hmm. Okay? So I could break down any of the free content into deeper dive content, right? Green Tech Media had a whole research team. That's what WoodMac bought. The value of GTM for WoodMac was not the 100,000 visitors to the website a day. It was not the 50,000 plus email list. It was the data and the research. And it turns out, the podcast team, right? So GTM had this deep data team that Shale ran that made bukus of money for them, right? So the third leg is going to be obvious when I tell you, like, oh, of course, that makes sense. In a minute, if you can guess what the third leg is, just looking at the GTM model, thinking about what's missing from what I've told you. But if we think about directory is access to knowledge. Okay, I don't have a research team. I don't have a data team. I don't even have access to data. I'm not calling thousands of companies asking. I could be. That's what Ohm Analytics does, right? Yep. They have a brilliant model doing that. Okay. But I have access to community. I have access. The reason that 70 people show up to a dinner that I host the day before RE Plus starts is because I have access to people they don't.
You've got eyeballs.
I have eyeballs.
And
right?
ears.
And I have ears. And I have influence. So that's like what used to be directory, which was the D, which was the leg of the stool that is sort of the legacy media leg of the stool. It was content, directory, and one more leg. Directory is community. It is, I know how to call this guy's phone number and you don't. If you join my community, GTM Squared, I'll give you deeper dive into this community of data, research, knowledge, people that I've built access to. Right, so it's access. I kind of look at this one as access, okay? What do you think the third leg of the stool is?
Advertising.
No, so you can monetize any of these with advertising.
Okay.
You can monetize content, the free content with advertising. That every website does that. All right, try again.
I don't know.
Okay, think about GTM's model. How do they reinforce their journalistic content and research and data? How do they bring people together and reinforce that in a flywheel?
Conferences.
events.
Yep.
Okay. So the 3 legs of the stool for any media company, and you can try this against every single company that's doing like traditional media play. Bloomberg is a great example of this. Okay. Content, which they can monetize. They have free content and they have paid content. Data, access, directory, right? Directory and events. The events is the linchpin because it gets you in a real world environment where you see real people who rely on this data and these connections, and then you can sell them your stuff in person.
And you can charge a lot of money for people to attend those events.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So this is one of the pieces that's missing for our company right now. We've done the content piece, we've done the directory piece, and we're this year, I haven't actually announced it anywhere else, but I'll tell you first, and we're doing a Suncast Summit October 1st to 3rd, and it's exclusively for the top 100 CEOs in the industry. And it's a private invite-only gathering in Denver. And it might sound like a little Illuminati, but it is intentionally to bring people into a room, not unlike what we were doing over the weekend with our friends here in Berkeley, where several of us were able to gather together and just talk offline. No recordings. And better understand where's the industry going, what's the narrative we need to really grow as an industry instead of shrink when things like the ICC fall away, right? And that's everyone from you as a residential CEO, residential solar focused primarily CEO, all the way to, Sheldon Kimber running one of the largest utility scale companies in the world, right? So you asked about my team. My team is a really small but mighty team. I have an operations director. I have a production manager. I have a director of content who also is our key editor. And I have a small content team. And my wife is the controller, and I have a bookkeeper. And then we have one person dedicated to what we call customer experience. So Brittany is the most dedicated, committed follow-up person I've ever met. She manages all of their relationships. And we used to have her on outside sales, but she's so much better at inside sales and directing traffic that we pulled her inside and made her customer experience. And we're building out an outside sales team now. And really, the outside sales has fallen almost entirely on myself and Brittany and a couple of other folks that have helped us with sales. But key is, how do we build an organization that can be nimble, that can leverage AI, that doesn't get bloated and therefore overweight on OpEx, but can manage to leverage these relationships and conversations, turn traditionally long-form content, because we record like 75 to 90-minute conversations, into content that people consume in a 6-second environment, right? People have a 6-second brain right now with social media. So how do you hook them in 3 to 4 seconds, keep them for 30 seconds, and have them get on that flywheel of like, that 30 seconds was good, I'll watch 3 minutes. That 3 minutes was good, I'll watch 30 minutes. That 30 was good, I'll watch the whole thing. It was so good that I'll come back next time, because I believe now that Suncast Media as a brand can deliver the goods when they say they give me exclusive access to insights about how this industry is growing and how I can participate in it.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. Talk about some of those sponsors. How do you sign them up? Because that's paying the bills.
Yeah, it is. I'm really proud of the relationships we've been able to build through the years. I mentioned that Enphase was our first sponsor all the way back in 2016. And it came through a relationship because I was doing business in Latin America, and Luis, the guy who was running Latin America's sales, came to me and he's like, hey, I think we do a partnership together. I've got a little bit of budget. I ended up flying to Petaluma, sitting down with them, signing a deal for like $16,000. I didn't even have 16 episodes, Barry. But because I'd been in marketing and I worked on Trina's team in marketing where we managed a $3 million budget, I go, okay, what is it that Enphase wants? Enphase wants influence. Enphase wants a person in the marketplace that can help capture customer stories. So instead of advertising for them, I said, let's create the LATAM Pioneer Series. You bring me your 6 best installers. I'm going to get their business story. And inside of it, I'll do some in-story narrative where, coincidentally, through the questions I ask, they're going to mention sort of why and how they incorporate Enphase, because it's the best product, right? So a little bit of product placement cameo shows up in the interview, and it felt seamless. Enphase was over the moon because it was the best customer testimonials they could have gotten. And I wove them into the story, and I got paid like $2,500 per episode. And I told this to Stephen Lacey at the time, and he was just like, this is magic. Like, People aren't even paying you for downloads, which is how the industry works. It's like, oh, you pay like a CPM, the same advertising model. Like, it's like, no, I'm not working on CPMs. I am helping companies connect with their customers in a more authentic way. I don't care how many of their customers listen. I care that they're able to communicate their message in a more brand-aligned way and that their marketing pillars are served with the content that we create. And that is a service I'm giving them. If 5 people listen or if 5,000 people listen, the content we create is still the same value to them, and they can then take it on their marketing list and their campaigns and their outreach. They can take the same content, push it out to their channels. And by the way, if they were to create this content themselves and hire an agency, it's going to cost them 2 or 3x what it would cost to work with me. And I have I have deep industry knowledge. I can ask better questions. Okay.
And it doesn't come across as advertising. It's
That's
an
correct.
objective testimonial. It's just a story. I'm kind of doing the same thing here. I just like to tell the truth to people, and the companies are interested, participants are interested. It's kind of surprising me. And everybody loves to get mic'd up and, on these podcasts.
It's surprising.
Funny.
It's surprising how much people will say when you get them behind the mic, because it really just feels like we're having a conversation. And I'll mention this and we can move on. I remember when I first started the podcast, I said, I want this to feel like we're sitting at a bar at SPI, this is what now is called RE+, having a drink, sharing stories. And I want the listener to feel like they're sitting in the chair next to us. We're oblivious to them there. We have no idea someone's eavesdropping. And someone walks up to them and says, hey, I'm going to the next party. And they say in return, no way, I'm not leaving till they leave because this conversation is too good. Bartender, bring me another drink. I'm just here minding my own business, eavesdropping on these guys. Can't pull me away. I had Paul Grana, no kidding, Paul Grana from Helioscope call me up within a month of starting the podcast. And he said, dude, I feel like, I never said this, by the way, to anybody. I just manifest it. Paul calls me, and I've known him forever. He says, dude, it feels like I'm just eavesdropping on a conversation between you and a friend at like a bar at SPI. He said, it's crazy.
There's a ton of value with that. That's why you're 800 something episodes. You're doing terrifically well. I just kind of like chug along, and I like to focus on things that really are helping the residential industry, the commercial industry.
There's something to be said for that, Barry.
People. Yeah, that's
because you really do focus on what is it that homeowners need to know, and you're tactical and you're precise, and you bring in industry leaders who can give sometimes a counterpoint to what you're saying, but allow folks to be able to make a reasonable assessment of what they want to do.
And then the way the energy show is evolving is moving from solar to solar and storage to electrification. So we're doing a lot of shows on heat pumps. It's really focused on what the consumer wants to know from an industry insider kind of expert info. All right. Well, any other thoughts on advice for companies in our industry?
Well, I'll ask along the lines of how I typically begin to wrap up our episodes. I think that readers are leaders and leaders are readers. I believe that we can learn a lot from those who've come before us if we learn to apply that sort of decision-making model and framework. So I'm curious, Barry, if there are any books that have particularly impacted the way you think about business or the way you approach the world. And I like to couch this sometimes by saying, are there books that you've gifted the most or that you've read more than once?
I don't read as many business books as I used to. Business school and things like that. I kind of read books right now just to relax and not worry about things.
Sure.
But I spend a lot of time every morning and every night on key media, Bloomberg, New York Times, LA Times, Washington Post, read all of the solar newsletters that I can. And your comment about readers are leaders, I look around and I see the companies that are really continuing to do well and the leaders that are doing that, and they are voracious readers.
That's right.
I can just see it.
Yeah.
All right.
I want to share one. I was looking for the author, see if I can find it really quick, because I don't read books traditionally. I've actually been trying to get through a book on brand positioning. And I can't even remember the name of that book, but I'll probably link to that one. I've been reading a lot on how to sell and how to position your brand. But there's a book called All the Time in the World by Lisa Broderick and Don Miguel Ruiz. Now, Don Miguel Ruiz you might recognize as the guy who wrote the 4 Agreements. And I like to recommend books that work on what's, between your ears more than what's between the margins on your balance sheet, because that's where it all originates. Oh, the book's called Sales Pitch by April Dunford. Everybody should read the book Sales Pitch by April Dunford. Thank you, Spencer Meeks for making that recommendation. I'll pass that one along. But this book, All the Time in the World, in an era where we feel like we just don't have enough time, the reality is that we have all the time in the world. And that book lays out a lot of esoteric things about how we waste time, but we also can manufacture time. And then the third book that I would recommend is a book called, it's a guy named Matthew Dix. And so I'm looking at a book that thank you, Audible. I'm looking at a book by Matthew called Stories Sell. And he wrote a book called Story Worthy. And if you want the best primer I've ever read on how to tell a story, which is something that I've been told I'm naturally gifted at. So actually, like, that book just blew my mind. I was like, oh my gosh, I do that, but I don't do that. I do that, but I don't do that. It's great. Being able to, you've probably noticed that several times you ask me a question and I don't answer exactly. Always, this is what I say in politics, answer the question you want to answer, not the question you're asked. I learned that you have to really create imagery, especially in our medium, for people. Matthew Dix teaches that in such beautiful prose, and he gives great examples. So it turns out Matthew Dix was the Moth Story Hour Story Slam winner twice. And he went on to be a coach of how to do storytelling, and he wrote this book because he got tired of having to tell people all the pieces. He literally put everything in a book. It's called Storyworthy. And then he's got a book called Stories Sell that's following a Storyworthy. I'm actually about halfway through that one. Storyworthy is a brilliant book. So Storyworthy, and then the other one by April Dunford that I think I mentioned called Sell It, Sales Pitch, and then All the Time in the World. We have asked every guest for 830 episodes about what book they would recommend, with very rare exception. And we track it on Suncast, and we have a top 10. And I'd recommend folks go over there because every book you buy through our affiliate links helps pay for my kids' college. But it actually is a canon of work that my friend Daniel Deuce, he said, I buy every book that's recommended because I'm interviewing people he genuinely aspires to emulate, right? I think that's really important. That's one of the things that for me is the heartbeat of Suncast. I only bring people on, Barry, like you, who have done something remarkable that is worthy of emulating, and they have something to say.
Well, right back at you, Nico.
Thank you.
Because that's why you're such a great podcaster. You're fascinating to listen to. You're a great storyteller. You're a great interviewer. You dress for success, clearly, you know, when you meet people in person. But just really hats off to you, the way that you built Suncast Media. Now, let me ask a question. What do you do for fun? This is a Sunday, Father's Day.
It is.
We're both working. What do you do for fun?
You know what's funny? I mean, my wife said to me, I was on the way here. It's Father's Day. I'm in California. I live in North Carolina, for anybody who doesn't know. And she said, you really enjoy this, don't you? And I was like, what? She said, these interviews. I said, well, yeah. And she said, you're really going to do a podcast? She said, this guy's as crazy as you are. And I said, he actually is. Just as crazy as I am. He believes that this is fun. He believes this is enjoyable. So I do this for fun. A. All right, B. I have 3 children who have tireless energy. Whether I like it or not, I jump on the trampoline every day. Every day. So my exercise used to be running. It used to be a lot. It's now trampoline. I am a world-class dad acrobat. I just made that word up. I'm a dad acrobat because I like flip my kids around. And yes, I can still do a backflip with a full twist. And I can still do all because my kids require it of me. We also go camping, and I go rock climbing, and I kite surf. So I love adrenaline. I'm an adrenaline junkie. I used to surf a lot, but I don't live in California anymore. It's 4 hours to a good beach where I live. Outer Banks is just epic. When I do go, it's kite surfing and surfing. But rock climbing has become my passion. Dear friend of mine, David Peñalva in the industry, challenged me to get good enough to go climbing with him. And a week before RE Plus this past year, I got a chance to go actually rock climbing with him. And he complimented me that I'd finally gotten good enough for us to go outside. So I love rock climbing. Ever since when I started Blue Line Power in 2006 and in Marina, California, I would go to this place called The Sanctuary. It was literally, it was my sanctuary. I realized, also, there's 2 things I like about rock climbing. One, they don't call them climbs. They're problems. You're not expected to finish it in one attempt. It's a problem. And you got to figure that problem out. Okay, A. And I learned from Alex Honnold, who I had the privilege, thank you, Carrie Hayes, to interview Alex Honnold, that I learned that climbing is based on objectives. How's that for business parlance, right? Climbers have objectives. So Alex had an objective when he went to Yellowstone. He planned for months. He didn't climb El Capitan with no ropes because on his first attempt. It was an objective. He spent years preparing for it. Every entrepreneur can appreciate that, right? I actually wish that everybody would go listen to that episode because it was so much deeper than just like me interviewing a rock climber. I really got into the psyche of Alex Honnold and how he thinks about business and why he created a nonprofit. But I rock climb because it is the only place where I can think about nothing else. My ADD brain can turn off and I can only think about the next hold. I got to get there. And now I got to get there. And where are my feet? And where's my body and my hips? And how am I? And after 90 minutes of doing that, I feel more zen than any meditation I could ever attempt.
Yeah. I just would love, for me, taking my kids camping, going hiking. And that's one of the things that, here, my wife isn't a big camper, but we go hiking all the time.
Yeah.
And even when the kids were 2 years old, 3 years old, I would carry them on my back. I had some were walking.
Yeah.
And, we had a saying, there's a hike, but a hike is only over 5 miles. So, everything we went was at least 5 miles. And there was a lot of grumbling, but, and when they were young, now the kids are like, those are some of the best times ever.
Yeah.
And the best trip we ever went on as a family. Think about this. We went to some place called Phantom Ranch. And Phantom Ranch is at the bottom of the Grand Canyon.
Whoa.
And so you go to the Grand Canyon, and if you reserve 1 year in advance, you can reserve cabin spots at Phantom Ranch.
Get out.
And it is the best trip ever. Now, I'm saying that because it was a complete mutiny in my family. Everybody was ready to kill me. But it was 8 miles to go down on the Kaibab Trail, and we're tired. All the way down, the rangers are saying, if you aren't on the trail by 4:30 in the morning, you're going to die. And that got that up early in the morning. We stayed down there for 2 wonderful nights, plenty of food, and then we got up early in the morning, and it took us till 4:30 in the afternoon to get up. It's 10 miles up.
Yeah.
But the level of satisfaction to complete that trip was great. Now, my wife is still looking at those photos and saying I was ready to kill you. But if you can ever book that trip with your trip, Phantom Ranch at the bottom of the Grand Canyon.
My father-in-law wants to whitewater raft the Colorado.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think that trip's going to happen.
You got to make time for it.
I got a chance to ask you when we did a walk around how and why you got in the solar industry. Are you interested in why I got in the industry?
Yeah.
Do you have time for it?
Yeah, I do. It's one of the last questions.
Okay. So I was in the music industry. More specifically, I was in the Christian music industry. I was raised a WASP, evangelical Southern Baptist family, South Carolina. Moved out to California. When I was in college, I knew I wanted to be in the music industry. Hell, when I was 2 years old, I knew I wanted to be in the music industry. I was standing on the stage in my church singing at 18 months old, 2 years old, 5, 10, 15. I always was on stage. There's no surprise to anybody in my family. I make a living on the microphone. And in fact, when I started Suncast, it was after years of saying, I will make a living with my voice. And in fact, as a salesperson, like we do anyway, like you use your voice to compel folks. So I went to the Peace Corps, and that was my breakup with the music industry. I was in grad school in Monterey, and I was doing this Master's International program. I went down to the Peace Corps. I came back for 1 semester. I had one last semester before I could get my MBA. And the summer before I went to Peace Corps, I worked for Celebration Concerts. John Robertson ran the largest concert promotion business for the Christian industry west of the Mississippi. Pretty much if you did a concert on the West Coast, John was a gatekeeper in the Christian industry. He ran a conference. He ran a 3-day festival. It was kind of like Lollapalooza for Christians. It's called Spirit West Coast. 100,000 people. All the top bands. Like if you listen to K-Love at all, those bands were all there. Like you name it. If they were a famous band from 99, from 98 to 2003, they were there. DC Talk, all of them, right? All the big bands. When I came back from the Peace Corps, after being the artist relations manager for Spirit West Coast, this is like in my mid-20s, the pinnacle. I was on path. Like I knew every artist relations manager of every major band in my Rolodex. Okay, like my path was paved, golden streets. I had an entrepreneurial class, Entrepreneur 101, grad school, Fred Kropp. my professor. He split this into 2 groups, 10 people each. And this guy walks in from a company that everyone will know in Monterey called the Monterey Jazz Festival. And I was like, done. I don't even care what the other group is. This is my group right here, Monterey Jazz Festival, layup, right? Listen to the guy talk. Everybody's kind of deciding what group they want to go to. Another guy walks in, Ed Bless, running a company called H2 Solutions out of Central California. And he was doing this thing called energy mapping. And he had this vision that solar was going to be ubiquitous and that we were going to integrate wind and hydrogen and natural gas. He had a nat gas car, like a compressed natural gas car, CNG, which I ended up driving for several years. He came in and he painted a picture of, I had just come back from the Peace Corps now. I had lived in a village where there was spotty electricity at best, almost no water, very poor families. And he painted a picture of developing this, what he called a developing nations kit, where solar could be deployed in emergencies to provide clean water and restoration services to communities in need all over the world. I was immediately smitten. Mm-hmm. And I was like, wait, solar can do this? Like, you just lay out a solar panel and it can power a home and it can power like power tools and it can purify water. Now, I had just been through a major hurricane in Guatemala the week before I finished terminated service, where my entire town lost power, where all the food sources went bad, where nobody had purified water for a week, where people got sick and died. And if we just had and access to this technology would have saved people's lives.
Yeah.
My professor said, I went to his room and I said, I'm really confused because in my head, it makes perfect sense for me to go to the jazz festival. Like, it's a layup. I'll get a job afterwards. Like, this is in my heart. There's just something about clean energy that is like borderline righteous.
Yeah, no, that's why I got into the industry, in college.
Yeah.
And this was in the middle of the Arab oil embargo.
Yeah.
And it just seemed to me like there's got to be a better way. Solar thermal was there.
Yeah.
But Nico, you encapsulate what I kind of look at the definition of people who are successful in the solar industry. You're on the media side, whether it's developing products, doing installations, helping sales and marketing. But there's a combination of intelligence, of work ethic, and the last is passion.
Yeah.
And it's the people who are passionate about this, that they just want to do the right thing, and that they will put their heads down and break through any brick wall. Yeah. And that's why we're going to continue to do well.
That's exactly right.
All right, so backing up a little bit, how can people get in touch with you at Suncast?
Oh, it's really easy. Suncast.media is the easiest way to connect and find out like where you can listen to the show and all of our socials. But I'm very active on LinkedIn. I've been very fortunate over the last 15 years to get, about 2,000 followers a year. So 30,000-ish followers now on LinkedIn. I do respond actually more often to LinkedIn comments, messages than I do to emails. I'm terrible at emails. I would give somebody my email if I didn't like them. Because as Barry knows, it takes me a while to respond to emails. Really, suncast.media if folks are interested in how we can help them tell their story. And then LinkedIn if you just want to see how we help others tell their story, and or if you want to connect with me more directly.
That's all the time we have on this first episode with Nico Johnson, host of Suncast. Thanks to all of our listeners for tuning in. And please tune into the second episode with Nico Johnson, which focuses on the challenges the solar industry is facing with changes to solar tax credits, tariffs, and state policies. And for more Energy Show episodes, please go to our website at energyshow.biz.
This episode of The Energy Show was sponsored by Solarcraft, providing solar, batteries, and heat pumps to Marin, Sonoma, and Napa counties for over 40 years. Solarcraft's 100% employee owners help our community step out of their carbon footprint and into saving money. Visit solarcraft.com.